Hey everybody, I had to leave early today to go to a doctor's appointment. I'm not sure if I'll see you before I actually run out the door today or not, so be good for the sub. If you notice, here's our agenda for today, Tuesday, January 17th. Due today was that World War I map. So in case you forgot, we did that digital map in class on Friday where you had to drag and drop those labels to each country, and then you had to answer 4 questions about the different, Allied and Central powers for World War I. Make sure you got that done and turned in. And some of you have some missing work from last week. Make sure you check Skyward and you get that missing work turned in. So on today's agenda, we're going to do some notes, and you're going to watch a video clip, and then you're going to spend the rest of the time working on your trench warfare worksheet. And if you don't finish it, it's homework. On Friday, there will be a quiz on World War I. I've already posted the quiz review questions. There's no reason to stress about it. We will review for the quiz in class on Thursday. All right, so first thing you're going to need is to take out your World War I notes. So go ahead and take out your World War I notes. They look like this. You got them on Friday. If you were gone last week and need a copy, make sure you raise your hand and the sub can give you a copy. We're starting here at Roman numeral 2. The 2 sides, and you're going to be filling in this next part here. All right, so what you're going to be filling in on your notes page. Oh, just a second there, guys. Technical difficulty. All right, sorry about that. So the first thing you're going to fill in is the central powers. So you're looking at Roman numeral 2, where it says central powers, and next to central powers, you might want to write the word bad guys, because the Central Powers are basically the bad guys of World War I. Now, next to your numbers, you're going to fill in your countries down here. So you're going to fill in, whoops, sorry about that. You're going to fill in number 1, Germany, number 2, Austria-Hungary, skip Italy, that's why I have it in bold, and you're going to write down number 4, Ottoman Empire, and number 5, Bulgaria. So fill in Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. Just the stuff there at the bottom corner of the chart. See where I'm looking there at the bottom corner? Now, Italy, you're leaving that off your list because Italy, it started off as considered a bad guy. It was part of the Triple Alliance, but it decides to remain neutral. Once the war gets going, they decide not to honor the alliance. They think that fighting over this is ridiculous. They're not prepared for war. They're not sure they can win. And so they stay neutral and refuse to honor the alliance. Within just a few weeks of fighting, the Ottoman Empire, which is present-day Turkey, they get involved, hoping the Germans will win and they'll get more land out of the war, and Bulgaria also joins for similar reasons. Now, if you're looking at number 5, you're going to fill in the Triple Alliance. Now remember, the Triple Alliance is made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. So the Triple Alliance is just those first 3. So I'm looking at Roman numeral 2, part A, number 5, Triple Alliance, and you're filling in just those first 3 things. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Those are your bad guys. So the Triple Alliance becomes the Central Powers minus Italy. They're your bad guys in World War I. All right, so now go ahead and look at part B. If you guys are falling behind, raise your hand. The sub can always hit pause. For part B, where it says Allied Powers, next to it, you're going to write good guys, because the Allied Powers basically are the good guys of World War I. So now that you've written good guys next to the Allied Powers, let's look at Roman numeral 2, part B, and you're going to fill in 1 through 7. So you're going to write down Great Britain, France, Russia. See at the top corner here, number 4 is Belgium. Number 5, you're going to fill in Serbia. Number 6 is Greece, and number 7 is Italy. So for that 1 through 7, fill those in. Great Britain, France, Russia, Belgium, Serbia, Greece, and Italy. Those 7 countries, all within the first 6 months of the war, joined the Allied-powered side. So Italy started off as a bad guy, as part of the Triple Alliance. They refuse to honor that alliance. For a few months, they are neutral. And then they surprise everyone. They join the Allied-powered side, believing that their cause is stronger and more just, and that perhaps they will win the war, and they're hoping to get land and territory from Austria-Hungary out of the war. Now the United States, number 8 there, you probably want to write that off to the side. So somewhere on the side of your paper, just make a note. The United States enters the war later, not until 1917. The war has already been going on for nearly 2.5 years by the time the United States enters World War I. So you're going to make a note off to the side. The USA comes in much later. So now let's fill in number 8. So for number 8, the Triple Entente. Remember, the Triple Entente is considered the good guy alliance, the opposing alliance to balance power. That is made up of Britain, France, and Russia. So looking at the Allied powers, the first 3 there, Great Britain, France, and Russia, is known as the Triple Entente. So for number 8, Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia. So that is kind of weird, I know, when you're looking at it. The Triple Alliance became the Central Powers, and the Triple Entente became the Allied powers. So try not to get that confused in your mind. The Alliance did not become the Allied. The Alliance did not become the Allied. Okay? I didn't name this stuff. I know it's kind of weird how they do it. So just try to keep that straight in your minds, kids. Okay? I know it's pretty strange. So let's move on to part 3 here. And as we move on to part 3, Western Front, you have to think about kind of the timeline of events. So we left off last week talking about how July 28th, Austria-Hungary had declared war on Serbia because they were angry that the Serbians, or the Black Hand, right, the terrorist group, had murdered the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife. So he was heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and they wanted revenge. They wanted land and power, and they wanted submission from Serbia. Serbia rejected this ultimatum. And so, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia because now Germany promised to help them by giving them a blank check of support, and Germany basically declared war on Serbia. Part of the reason, remember, Serbia said that they didn't care, they weren't going to accept the ultimatum, they weren't going to become a police state and surrender their control, was because they had the support of Russia. Remember, Russia had said that they would support the Serbians supposedly because of pan-Slavism. This idea that all Slavic peoples of the same ethnic background should help one another. So, Serbia rejected it. So by August 1st, Germany declares war on Russia. Austria-Hungary declares war on Russia. And Germany knew that if they were at war with Russia, they would soon most likely be at war with France and Britain. Because remember, France, Britain, and Russia are all in the Triple Entente together. So if they're at war with Russia, they're also basically at war with France and Britain. And so, Germany decided to move quickly, which gets us to A, the Schlieffen Plan. And you're going to write something down about how the Schlieffen Plan was Germany's strike first plan. So you're going to write something down about how the Schlieffen Plan was Germany's strike first plan. Germany wanted to attack France very quickly to take it out of the war. So write something down about how the Schlieffen Plan was Germany's strike first plan. They wanted to take France quickly out of the war. They wanted to avoid a two-front war. So make sure you're looking at your notes, part 3A. Germany in the Schlieffen Plan wanted to attack France very quickly in this strike first plan to take France quickly out of the war. They're trying to avoid a two-front war. So what do I mean by that? Let me go back and show you one of my better maps. I thought I have a better map somewhere. Maybe not. Let me hit pause here and I'll find a map. All right, folks, I added a map. Sorry about that. If I was actually there, I would have pulled out the big map, which is what I did in the other classes. So if you take a look at the map at the top here, okay, Germany knows that they're going to be fighting Russia. And look at Russia. It is a massive empire going from Europe into Asia. At this point in 1914, okay, and even today in the world, no one has ever conquered Russia. Napoleon had tried 100 years earlier in the Napoleonic Wars and failed in a huge disaster. It was too cold, they ran out of food, they ran out of supplies, they ran out of men. The Russian people never gave up. They would simply burn down their own house and then pack up their stuff and move in with strangers and move east so that when the French came, they thought they would find food and shelter in a town, but everything had been destroyed. And the Germans knew to expect that in World War I, that the Russians may use a scorched earth policy again. So the Germans didn't want to do that. And they knew that they were going to end up at war with France because of the Triple Entente. So they come up with the Van Schlieffen Plan. And General Van Schlieffen says, we'll attack the French quickly. They're not ready for war. They're not fully mobilized the way we are. We'll go in, we'll destroy them, and then we can focus our efforts on Russia. And the Germans, remember, believe they're better than everyone else. They have the help of the Austro-Hungarians, plus the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria, and even Romania will come into it. So they really think they'll be fine, and they can eventually take over Russia. So the plan is to avoid a two-front war, but it will fail and end up being a two-front war. And when I say two-front, we're talking about two different portions of the map. When we're talking about fighting in Russia, that's the Eastern Front. When we're talking about fighting here in France, that's the Western Front, okay? So what's going to happen is that the Germans, they're going to launch their attack here with the Von Schlieffen Plan. And their plan is going to be super sneaky, and it's not going to work. It's a great plan, but it fails, and it ends up falling into trench warfare. Now let's take a look at your notes. So for part B, okay, where it says trench warfare, next to trench warfare, you're going to want to write something down about how it's fighting from deep ditches or tunnels. So trench warfare is fighting from deep ditches or tunnels. Some of you already were familiar with that, some of you were not. But trench warfare is fighting from deep ditches or tunnels. And if you didn't get that, it's okay. We'll put it on the next slide. But it's fighting from deep ditches or tunnels. So here's what's going to happen. The Germans, okay, they could have attacked right here along the German-French border. But that's not what they're going to do. The Germans are smart. As they declare war on the French are going to all line up here at this German-French border, here near the town of Metz, and here near the province of Lorraine. And so all the French are lined up, planning to stop the German invasion. What the Germans do in the meantime is they go through the Belgium country, go in through the Ardennes forests, and then head towards Paris. Now the Germans are very smart. Belgium is a very peaceful nation, almost like Switzerland. It has a very small military force, more of a local militia to defend themselves. They have never been focused on military factors or weapons or an army. You know, Belgium is a peaceful country. You know, think about it. Belgium chocolates and waffles and the world's French fries. You know, it's mostly a farming nation. You see some travel and trade and tourism in the north and up by the big city of Brussels, but that's it. And so they did not want to be involved in any conflict whatsoever. Germany busts in here, goes to the forest area where no one expects, and then heads towards Paris. And so they're going to be attacking France kind of through a back entrance, and the French will not be ready. Now, the Germans really get their nicknames here for being the bad guys, because as they go through Belgium, they do terrible things. They rape women, they kill kids, they burn down homes, they steal property. And this is when the Germans really get called the Huns, the evil aggressors, get portrayed as monsters. And these actions will be drawn into posters, and it will be turned into propaganda. And it will convince people to enlist in the war. It's part of the reason why Britain, which was hesitant about honoring its alliance, will get into the war. And then it really kind of cements more countries coming in, people enlisting. Eventually they'll have to have a draft or conscription, but this is really going to lead to, volunteers. And people, as the war starts, thinks it will only last a few months. Now, the Germans, as I said, are heading towards Paris. And as the Germans are heading Paris, you might say, why Paris? It's because Paris is the capital. Think about it this way. If Canada all of a sudden decided to attack the United States, Washington, D.C. would be one of their primary targets because it's our capital city. You've got all the politicians there. That's where the president is located. It would definitely be a place they would attack. And in this case, that's where the Germans were headed. Once the French realized they've made a grave error and they've been defending this border here along France and Germany in this Lorraine province and kind of throughout here, and instead the Germans had come through Belgium and are headed towards Paris, the fighting is going to backtrack, and the French and the Germans are going to fight a major battle here along this Marne River. So if you're looking at your notes, let's go back and look at those some more. Looking at Roman numeral 3, part B, trench warfare. Where is it first used for number 1? You're going to write down that it was first used in the First Battle of the Marne. So that's this first bullet point here. Trench warfare was first used at the First Battle of the Marne. See it up here in this first bullet point? Germany tried to advance on Paris, but was stopped 30 miles short at the First Battle of the Marne. Okay, so I call it the First Battle of the Marne. I don't just call it that, historians do, because there is another battle later in World War I, nearly in the same position, near the same river, the Marne River, and that would be the Second Battle of the Marne. This one happens earlier, so it's the First Battle of the Marne. And like I said, there's fighting here about 30 miles off the edge of Paris, trying to stop the Germans from attacking it, taking the capital city, and really ending the war before it's begun. Now, as they are fighting this battle, it's a very open farmland kind of area. There's some trees, some brush to kind of hide behind, but not enough. And so they end up digging deep ditches for protection. And so it's really used as kind of a defensive measure to protect themselves from all this machine gun fire, which is kind of raining down on them so they don't die. Now for number 2, you're going to fill in that they end up building 450 miles of trenches. So for number 2, you're going to fill in that they end up building 450 miles of trenches. So see it for point number 2 here? So for point number 2, you're looking at Roman numeral 3, part B, trench warfare, number 2, what is it? You're going to fill in that they end up building 450 miles of trenches across this western front, so in France here. And these trenches are usually about a mile wide. There's multiple mile-wide trenches, basically stacked on top of each other in kind of a zigzag pattern. And then they'll have kind of corresponding trenches which will connect to them so food and supplies can be brought in. And you can notice in the picture here, they're very narrow. The British and French trenches were very different compared to the German trenches. In just a few minutes, you'll watch a video clip, but the German trenches are well made. The Germans never did anything by halves. They figured if we're going to have to build a trench for defense, let's do it. Let's do it right. They would try to put in electricity, places for the men to sleep with bunk beds, have a place for their food to be kept safe, try to keep away rats and kind of other critters. If somebody came into their trench to try to find out their secrets and their messages and kind of attacked it, they would set up booby traps that the enemy wouldn't know about. They would have better, bathroom spaces and kind of just better shelter so that the men's feet would not always be so wet, and try to have better protection from the elements because remember, you're outside here, maybe more underground like cave-like areas. The German trenches were great, but the French trenches are terrible, and the ones the British helped them build are not any better. The men are going to get stuck basically outside most of the time with very little protection from the elements, very little cave-like atmosphere. They're often walking around in basically muddy water, so their feet are always wet. There's no real sleeping area, so they often just have to sleep back to back, sitting in the mud. Their eating area is right next to the latrine where they go to the bathroom. There is a constant rat problem. Bodies often fall back into the trenches, and then they would have to kind of carry them out, and kind of once the fighting broke at night, often have to bury the dead then. But it was nasty. It was terrible. Now, the goal here, obviously, is to keep in your little trench for defense, but eventually the whistle is going to get blown by your commander. You're going to climb a ladder up out of your trench, 6, 10 feet high, whatever it is, and then you're going to go over the top, as they call it, past the barbed wire to keep the animals out, and then you're going to cross no man's land, go a few miles, and then get to the next trench, and hopefully you and several hundred men would be able to storm the next trench, kill the enemy, and gain more territory, whether you're pushing them back or advancing. So for number 3, you're going to fill in something about how no man's land is the land between the two trenches. So you're going to fill in something for number 3 about how no man's land is the land between the two trenches. And it's called no man's land because no man wants to get stuck there. No man wants to be running from one trench to the other. You've got Maxim machine gun bullets coming at you. You'd be likely to get assassinated at that point. It's terrible. So you're filling in no man's land is the land between the two trenches that no one wants to cross because you're likely to get shot. And there would be barbed wire there, dead horses, dead bodies. They would perhaps try to throw you a rope. Maybe a dog would even bring you out a rope so you could perhaps be pulled back to your trench. But by the time that could happen, men would often die, especially because they were in poor health anyway because of lack of food, lack of nutrition, lack of proper hygiene. So they were either dying from getting shot or from, disease settling in later, and it'd be difficult to get the men back to like a forward operating base to get any true medical care or surgery. By the time they would often be taken by ambulance there, they would usually die. Now, you might say, what happens if a man doesn't want to cross, no man's land when the whistle's blown? If he refuses to go up over the top and cross no man's land and fight, he'd be usually shot by his commander as being a coward, because they have to set an example. If one man doesn't fight, somebody else might mutiny and not fight. Or he would be arrested and called a coward, and letters would be sent home to his family about what a disappointment he was, and usually because for the sake of honor, most men would go and fight, and whether they wanted to or not, they'd been drafted at this point, they were going to go and fight and do their duty. Now, over time, more and more men were really losing faith in this cause. They might have signed up because they bought into propaganda and they thought it would be over by Christmas, just a few weeks or months, and they thought they'd be heroes and make all this money and, win. But they're starting to really be disillusioned here by the war. Many of them are going to start to develop shell shock as these grenades and shells are being blown up around them. They see their friends die. They're incredibly depressed. And they're starting to suffer from mental health disorders and not be able to sleep and have what today we would call, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, the men really don't want to be fighting, but they're really forced to. It's only, these politicians, these kings, these leaders who are forcing them to fight. Which gets us to number 4. You're going to write something down for number 4 about how on Christmas there is an unofficial Christmas truce. So there's an unofficial ceasefire on Christmas of 1914 between the French and the Germans. So that's our last bullet point on here. You're going to write something down about how there is a Christmas truce. In 1914, that Christmas, there is an unofficial ceasefire between the French and the Germans, where neither one shoots each other. They'd been shooting each other on Christmas Eve, and come that night, they were burying their dead, they're trying to get something to eat, they're writing letters home to their family, which are highly edited. The U.S. government tended to take out, and not just the U.S. government, the French, the Germans, they all censored and blacked out most of the letter. Because they were afraid of secrets leaking out, and they didn't want people at home to know how bad the war was going and how casualties actually were, how high those numbers were. So they were eating dinner, getting ready for bed, writing letters home, playing cards. Most of them actually were very depressed or bored, missing their families, especially at Christmas, unhappy that they volunteered or unhappy if they were drafted. And that night, the French heard the Germans singing Christmas carols. They started to sing Christmas carols back. And then they were kind of singing together in a sense, even though they were a few miles apart, they could hear each other as they all sang, and they sent messages to each other saying, let's unofficially have a ceasefire. It could not be official, of course, because, they were not Kaiser William II, leader of Germany, or Georges Clemenceau, the Prime Minister of France, but they unofficially stopped fighting. And then they didn't fight on Christmas Day, and then come December 26th, they started shooting each other again, because they were not really in control. But if the average man was in control of this war, he would have ended at this point, saying enough is enough, thousands have already died, and for what purpose? Last thing to write down today is just about life itself in the actual trench. And you're going to write down for number 5 something about how life in the trench was terrible. As I said, it could be, very lonely. They're missing their family. It could be very boring as they're waiting for a battle to start. There's not much to do. They're full of anxiety. During the actual battle, it was horrifying. It was hell on earth. Many of these men are going to suffer from shell shock as they watch their friends die. There's dead bodies everywhere. There's rats, even feasting on these bodies. The living conditions are just atrocious. There's not very much hygiene. They might not have been, taking any true proper bath or shower for weeks at a time until they're given some leave back to another base or, another portion of France or even back to England or somewhere safer, so to speak. And, so lack of hygiene. Many of them are dying from either getting shot or from the lack of hygiene. The food is awful, the sleeping conditions, and many of them really start to question why they're actually fighting this war that they don't want to be fighting. All right, folks, so that's the end of our notes. You're going to watch 2 video clips here, and then you'll have the rest of the time to work on your trench warfare worksheet. As you do your trench warfare worksheet with your group, you can divide it up. So one kid does question 1 and 2, the next kid does 3, the next kid does 4, the next kid does 5, the last kid does number 6. Okay. However you divide it up, you can put your names on it, staple them together, and if you don't finish it, it's homework. And remember, there's Quiz Friday. If you need help, feel free to email me, folks, and be good for the sub. Later.